Welcome to the tutorial Setting Up the Character to Use IK for Animate Pro. A second video will be made on this topic for Animate users. So the first thing we need to do is go into our library, and if you remember, our Karate Rabbit library is located just below the Animate Pro library. So from our Karate Rabbit library, let's grab our Karate Master template, go to the network view, and then click and drag and drop the Karate Master template into the network view. Then let's connect our Karate Master template to the composite, and then if you want, you can always delete this extra module or leave it. It's up to you. So the first thing we have to consider when using IK is how our character is rigged. As I mentioned in the previous tutorial, if you use the basic rig, this will not work at all. If you're following along with the tutorials and using all the sample material from the previous tutorials, your character is rigged using the hierarchy method. And if we enter our module, you can see that it's rigged like this. If you have a mixed rig, which means that maybe there's a hierarchy chain along the limbs, so the legs and the arms, but nothing for the body, the IK should still work. It'll make connections between hierarchical chains. So to begin, let's click on the IK tool button here in the Tools bar. And then let's click on the master peg so you can see the skeleton. So wow, that's a little bit scary. There's just a mess of red lines, a little bit hard to decipher, but I'll take you through this step by step. So the second thing to consider after knowing that your character has been rigged properly for IK is that we need to eliminate some bones. As I explained in the previous tutorial, there is a bone that has been created for not only a drawing object of a body part such as the hand, but also for the hand's peg, as well as if there are any patches for the hand. So there's essentially 3 bones there that you might not necessarily need. So in order to select bones here accurately, I'm probably going to use the timeline and the network view because it's hard to get on in there and pick a bone individually using command or control and clicking because I don't really know which one I'm selecting. So what I'm going to do is create a new window or a new place for the network window like that, and I'm just going to focus on the tool properties panel here. I'll try to make them about the same size. That's not bad. So when looking at IK, you have to think about which parts or which bones you would like to keep and which bones are unnecessary. So not only are extra bones for a drawing object unnecessary, so are detailed bones. You don't need bones to move the eyebrow, eyes, nose, and mouth, for example. These type of facial features you most certainly do not need bones for. So those we're going to ghost out for sure. And that's a term that we use, ghosting out. When I was describing the 3 parts that might exist for any individual body part, the one that you actually want to keep is the peg. And if there's a higher level peg, you want to keep the most top level peg in the group. So let's look at the shin, for example. It probably has a drawing object, a patch, a peg, but then there's also the lower leg peg, which is the peg for the shin as well as for the foot. So it controls both of them. So when deciding to get rid of the bones for the tibia here, I'm going to go for the lower leg. So I'm going to ghost out all 3 other parts. So let's begin maybe going from the bottom upwards. So I'm going to look for the foot first of all. And you can, another way you can click back and forth if you can't select a red bone directly in the camera view. Let's zoom in like that. Is you can actually toggle back and forth using the transform tool. So I can select this foot in the transform tool. We're not sure if it's the drawing object, the peg, whatever, but at least we know that it's in the domain of where we would like to select. Then I can click in the network view window and then use the keyboard shortcut O to bring me to which module or which layer or which body part has been selected. In this case, it's the actual TVG for the foot. So this I would like to ghost out for sure. And actually, let's look for it here as well. So I can click on the Centron Selection button. And there it is right there. So we can follow along as well in the timeline. So the way to ghost this out is to select the inverse kinematics tool in the tools toolbar. Then over here to make sure that you have the IK manipulation mode on. And then to click on this button here that's called exclude from IK. So this is how you ghost something out. You do it like that. And automatically we see that something has changed here in the camera view. This bone has now become a little bit more obvious into where its placement should be, closer to the foot. So let's use the keyboard shortcut B to go up the hierarchy chain, and let's use O again to find out where we are. So here's the foot peg. In this instance, like I said, for the lower leg there's a lower leg peg, but the highest level on the foot, as we can see here, is the foot peg. So we're not going to ghost this one out, we're going to leave it as is. After I've gone through the entire skeleton and ghosted everything I want, then I will go to the third part, which is to actually position these bones properly. So for now, let's leave this as is. And one thing that I realized that I forgot to mention is that after we fix up the skeleton, you'll be able to use it for all three views. So for the 3/4 profile view and for the profile view, this shouldn't be a problem. But there will be a few bones that might be a little out of place. So if you know you're going to animate mostly in the 3/4 view, it might be best to set up the rigging in the 3/4 view. It'll still work for the other two views, but at least all the alignments will be perfect for the 3/4 view. Otherwise, you're going to be dealing with a skeleton that's slightly off as you animate. So now let's go up the chain to the tibia here. So I'm going to select this, find it here in the network view. I'm also going to try to find it here in the timeline view. So we see the tibia here, it actually has a patch, and that's what I've selected. So I'm going to go down one to the tibia. I'm going to ghost this out. So I'm going to grab my IK tool and then ghost it out here. But I'm also going to go up the hierarchy chain to the patch, ghost that out. And then I'm going to go up the chain one more time to the tibia peg and ghost that out one more time. So the only thing I'm going to have left to represent this tibia, so this bone that will represent this drawing object right here, the shin or the tibia, will be represented by the bone that's on the lower leg peg. And it's also where our little cross is, if you can see. And so if you think about it, if you remember the way that this network view was structured, we had a sort of central vertebrae going down. It's all in capital letters for the most part, and it represents all your major pegs. So the upper body peg, the neck peg, the head peg, the facial features peg. So most of the time you're going to be ghosting out up until one of these drawing modules that have been converted into pegs. Usually that's your top layer. There's a few that are exceptions, such as the foot. We went up to the foot peg, which is this green peg. But if you can go up as high as this, it's usually the best thing that you can do. I'm going to speed up this video at a certain point because it's going to be a very repetitive process, but I will be sure to slow the video down and make comments anywhere where I see is necessary. So you'll notice for the facial features, I kept going all the way up to the facial features, but not ghosting them out. So I would do the pupil peg, the eye, and then stop at the facial features, and I keep going through the various eye parts, eyebrows, nose, mouth, all the way up to facial features. And now that I'm sure that everything beneath the facial features in terms of hierarchy have been ghosted out, now I've finally ghosted out the facial features. This peg with capital letters that controls all the facial features is an exception to the rule I told you before about following the ghosting up to this backbone that we've created for the Karate Rabbit, because like I mentioned before, you really don't need any type of IK movement done on the facial features. Okay, so you've may noticed I got rid of the hips. I ghosted out both the hips and the hip peg because I consider the lower body peg the only bone that I would need to control the lower body. The tail to me was like the hands and the feet where I just kept the top green peg, but I got rid of the drawing object. And the upper body was the highest level I had for this section here, so I got rid of the body peg, the torso, and just kept the upper body for this section. And unfortunately, unless you're using our rig to follow along, you kind of have to make those decisions for yourself. But the good thing to know is that you can always play around with it. You can always ghost something out and then unghost it if too much of the body disappears or if it looks wrong. So nothing is permanent, so don't worry about making mistakes. One thing that I do, just to double check that I ghosted everything out properly, is I actually right click in the timeline and say collapse expand, expand all. And then if you just maximize the timeline just for a second, you can see that the entire timeline layering stack has been expanded, so it's quite extensive. And then what I do is I scroll to the top and I go through each and every layer one by one and make sure that it's either ghosted out as it should be or not ghosted out as it should be, so I'm sure that I've checked everything. Because as you may have noticed as I was doing the face, there's a lot of things like you know, the eyelid with the eye, with the pupil, and they all have pegs. So there's lots of little details that have details embedded inside of details, and sometimes you miss them. So I do that to make sure I've gotten absolutely everything that I want to get. I'm not going to do that now, but that's something that you probably should do. The next step that we should do, so it's the third step, is to adjust the bones so that they fit properly over your character. So what I'm going to do is zoom in again. Actually, I'm going to collapse that for a minute. So a few that we see that are obvious here, like the ears, for example. So the function that you need selected right now is the bone editing mode. Then it's good to find the body part in the timeline. So let's use the transform tool again to select this ear, and then go in the center on, and then press on the center on selection button to find it in the timeline. So we know that even though the drawing object is selected here, we really want the peg. And then let's click on the inverse kinematic tool again. So then if I grab the bone for that ear and pull it, I can position it properly over the ear. So that sort of takes up a median amount of space. So even though it doesn't follow exactly in the drawing, if I move it, because it's centered almost in the middle, the whole object will move with this bone. So let's do that for the other ear as well. So something like that is not bad. So let's look for the tail. And we want the tail peg. And we can move this roughly to where we think the tail should be over here. Same for the hands. Like that. Let's do it for the feet as well. So this middle piece over here is actually connected to your master peg. So we're going to leave that. And lastly, I'm not really sure what this is, so I think it looks like it's coming from the mouth somewhere. It's odd. Let's see if we can see what's going on there. Oh, I wonder if this has something to do with it. The color over the cutter, the mouth peg. Definitely something in the face. Or in the neck. Aha, there's a head patch. Oh, right, for the mouth. So let's ghost that out. As well as its peg, so that's what that was over there. So like I said, if you had actually gone through these layer by layer, like I suggested, we would have found that a bit sooner. But that's not really a problem. So it looks like everything is well and positioned. One thing we do want to do is mark the master peg as being something that we want to be able to translate if it's the top of the hierarchy. So let's go to the top and select the master peg, which is this one right here, and let's click on that. And as you can see, the X is now formed on that bone that represents the master peg. And if you actually follow it up, it does go to the center of the body, or where the belly button is, and which is probably where the pivot point is for the master peg. So last thing we have to do to complete our rig is actually set the minimum maximum values if you have Animate Pro. You don't necessarily have to set the minimum maximum values. You really have to consider your own character carefully and decide whether you need this or not. For example, when I was moving just this foot around, you might have noticed I did something like this. Okay, the rabbit's leg would never move like that. It's not a horse. Its knee does not bend backwards. This is a very unnatural pose for the rabbit. It looks like its leg is broken or something. So in order to stop this from happening, you can set a minimum maximum value. But the only problem is that if you change views, like I said, so see the skeleton fits pretty well. When you go to the profile, you have this bone because it represents the foot number 1 over here that's being hidden. That's what I was talking about earlier, as well as the ears. You can't adjust the skeleton for the profile view. It'll still animate, it'll still work, but it's not going to be overlaid properly on this. And if you add constraints, it's a little bit worse, because something that you might want to constrain here, you might not want to constrain here, but you're going to be using the same skeleton for all three. So I'll set one minimum maximum value on a appendage with you, but you have to be aware that sometimes you just have to deal with not using minimum maximum value if you think it's going to hinder other views that you're going to use. If your other views are separate templates completely, so if you hadn't used your master peg and you'd individually done the skeleton for the 3 separate views, and there's different layers for the 3 separate views, you then could set minimum maximum value restraints because they wouldn't affect one another. So let's zoom in to this leg. And then let's be sure that the edit min-max angle mode is on. And then let's select the tibia here by selecting the transform tool and selecting it. And I'm just going to double check it's the right piece by using the Centron selection mode. So in fact, it's the patch, which we don't want. We want the lower leg peg. So I'm just going to go up the hierarchy. And then we're going to click on the enable min-max angle selection. And then this strange spiral with 2 handles appear. You might not be able to tell their handles, but one is a red handle with a green square at the end, and the other one's a red handle with a red square at the end. And the green square denotes the minimum angle, while the red square denotes the maximum angle. So you can never obviously have a maximum angle that's smaller than the minimum, and vice versa, a minimum angle that's larger than the maximum. And if you actually bring them too close together, they end up spinning together, so you don't want to do that either. So what we're looking for, I think, is to have maybe this be the maximum angle, so it can never spin maybe beyond that point. Let me actually just test it out using the IK manipulation mode. So if I grab this and move it around, now let's see, so it can bend pretty far. I can still bend the wrong way, so I don't think I did that right. So let's look at it again. Okay, it's getting pretty weird and stiff here. Okay, there we go. So it can't go past this right now. But it's going the wrong way. It can bend this way, but it can't bend the other way, so that's not what we want either. So let's try one more time. So it seems like I probably want to change this a bit. I think this is what I want. Okay, so it's bending this way, which is good. But it seems to not really bend too much past this. I want to be able to get a straight leg. Ah, there we go. Okay, good. So I can go straight, but I can't go past straight. But I can bend completely all the way, which is good. Okay, so that's what we want, and let's just go back to see what I did. So it looks like where you see this curve denotes where the curving is allowed. So this part that's blocked off, there's no red line or red curve on this side, means that this piece cannot rotate this way. It can only go from this minimum, which it is right now, as straight leg, and then as it rotates upward and folds completely in line with the thigh, that's its maximum value. So that's how you would set something like the min-max value. Okay, so I just realized that I created a keyframe here, which is not what we want. We really wanted to have set that on the first keyframe here in the row. So what I'm going to do here is just clear all keyframes, or delete keyframes rather. If we scroll across, you'll see that this remains the same, the min-max value, so we can leave that as is. Okay, so the last thing we need to do is create a template for our IK skeleton. So I'm going to go into the library, and we're still in the Karate Rabbit library, which is in the Animate Pro library. And what I'm going to do is right-click on it and say Write to Modified so I can add templates to it. And I'm going to collapse this entire thing. So you have the Karate Master, and I'm going to rename it to Karate Master _ IK. And then actually, because I should do this through the network view, I just realized I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to paste it here in the library. And so I'm going to rename it _IK. So I'm going to rename it Karate Rabbit Master IK. Let's say OK. And there it is right there. So that's it for the tutorial setting up the character to use IK for Animate Pro. Stay tuned for the next tutorial, animating with IK.